As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So a NATO official has suggested that Ukraine could cede some territory to Russia in exchange for joining the Western military alliance. So these comments were made on Tuesday by Stian Jensen, who's the chief of staff for NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And this was reported by the Norwegian newspaper VG. So Jensen said, quote, "I think that a solution could be for Ukraine to give up territory and get NATO membership in return," end quote. He added that it should ultimately be up to Ukraine when and on what terms to negotiate. So Jensen said that the issue of Ukraine's status after the war is being discussed within the alliance, and that some countries have raised the possibility of Kiev ceding some territory. The comments come as the Ukrainian counteroffensive is stalling, and Western officials are admitting that it's very unlikely to succeed. So this is interesting because this is the first time that a high-level NATO official suggested Ukraine might have to cede territory to Russia. The US and NATO have backed Ukraine's demands for peace, which include Russia withdrawing from all the territory that it has captured since invading. And they also want Russia to give up Crimea, which it has controlled since 2014. So very maximalist demands that are a non-starter for negotiations with Moscow. So definitely interesting to see, a high-level official within the alliance say this. So Jensen's suggestion drew a sharp rebuke from Ukraine. So Mikhailo Podolyak, he's an advisor to Zelensky. He was not happy with what Jensen had to say. He said, quote, "Trading territory for a NATO umbrella, it is ridiculous. That means deliberately choosing the defeat of democracy, encouraging a global criminal, preserving the Russian regime, destroying international law, and passing the war onto other generations," end quote. So I'm just going to read a little bit here from this article. "Bodies ripped to pieces, arms and legs mangled beyond recognition. The mental anguish of amputating limb after limb after limb is a grim reality of Ukraine's counteroffensive. 4 doctors working in the Zaporozhye region. Heavily mined Russian defenses have slowed Ukraine's attack to a bloody, painstaking crawl, and hard-won gains come at the cost of mine blast injuries more abundant than some medical professionals say they have seen in the war thus far. With Russian forces having dug in over months, any push to regain territory means traversing land dense with mines, even as civilians far from the front lines also grapple with a diffusion of mines and other explosives in previously contested areas across much of the country." So they quote a Ukrainian military surgeon, Dmytro Mielkovitsky, and he has worked in the country since the start of the war, basically just saying there's mines everywhere. He has treated more mine blast injuries since the start of the counteroffensive in early June than in his previous work during the war. So it just goes to show how many of these injuries are. And there was that recent Wall Street Journal report that I covered that said somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 Ukrainians have lost limbs in this war. And these are amputations on the scale of World War I going on. All right. So the next one here, Blinken urges Congress to okay new Ukraine funds. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday called on Congress to approve President Biden's request for an additional $24 billion in spending on the Ukraine war right away. So the White House formally made the request to Congress last week. If this new spending is approved, it will bring total U.S. spending on the war to $137 billion. Blinken told reporters that he urged Congress to pass this supplemental funding. So supplemental funding, they call it emergency funding, is not limited by the debt ceiling deal that was reached between the White House and House Republicans. So House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, he's previously expressed that he might not support a supplemental funding bill that would blow past the spending limits. But on the other hand, he's a very staunch supporter of the proxy war against Russia. So I would be surprised if he holds this up, if he blocks this. I haven't seen any comments from him about this. I was trying to find it. I'm sure some reporters have asked him, but I didn't see anything anywhere. But over in the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is eager to approve the new Ukraine aid. He's saying that he wants to address it as quickly as possible. So we might see this be brought to the Senate floor pretty soon. And this $24 billion in Ukraine spending is part of a $40 billion supplemental bill that also includes domestic disaster relief and funds for border security. And then the breakdown of this $24 billion again is $13 billion in military aid, $7.3 billion in economic and humanitarian aid, and $3.3 billion for infrastructure projects for regional countries impacted by the conflict. And so what's interesting is that infrastructure spending is included in the name of countering China. So in a letter to McCarthy, the director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, when making the request for this spending, said, quote, "It is essential that we offer a credible alternative to the People's Republic of China's coercive and unstable lending and infrastructure projects for developing countries around the world," end quote. So I just thought it was interesting that they threw that in there, kind of combining Ukraine spending with, the new Cold War against China. So a new U.S.-backed military pact between Japan and Australia came into effect on Sunday that makes it easier for the two nations to deploy troops to each other's territory. And this is a type of cooperation that the Pentagon has called game-changing. So the Reciprocal Forces Agreement with Australia is the first deal of its kind that Japan has struck with another nation besides the U.S. in the post-World War II era. The U.S. has been encouraging allies in the Asia-Pacific to boost military ties as part of its preparations for a future war with China in the region. So we see a lot of examples of this, of the U.S. forging these stronger alliances in the region. So this agreement will make it less difficult to conduct joint military exercises in each country by relaxing immigration control for troops and simplifying procedures for transporting weapons and ammunition. So a senior Pentagon official told Nikkei Asia, quote, "We're seeing Australia play an increasingly important role in the regional security architecture. What we are aiming to do together in the years ahead, particularly with Japan, will be game-changing for strengthening regional stability," end quote. So according to the Australian Defence Ministry, the initial cooperation under this agreement will include the following. Japanese F-35s will deploy to Australia, and there will be an exercise Bushido Guardian where Australian F-35s will be deployed to Japan for the first time in early September. Australia will participate in exercise Yama Sakura as a full participant for the first time, with more than 150 personnel traveling to Japan in December. So this agreement is just one of many examples of the U.S. looking to forge alliances in the Asia-Pacific as part of its buildup against China, and Japan plays a very integral role in this effort since it hosts the largest U.S. military presence outside of the United States. Something like 38,000 U.S. troops in Japan, a ton of bases, mainly in Okinawa, where people don't want them. The majority of the people that live on the island, the governor included, are against, the U.S. military presence. But that doesn't matter to the U.S.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Ukraine war, big deal. Wars in Africa, who cares? They only got like 1.48 billion people, almost 1.5 billion people in Africa. Ukraine has a little over 36 million. But all we do is hear about Ukraine. People don't know anything about what's going on in Africa and how the United States and Europe are now getting more and more involved in what's going on there because they want to steal more stuff. Got to steal more stuff. Oh, we'll call it colonization. You have to be careful, by the way. They blacklisted a dear friend of mine. And I'm concerned about saying his last name. But his first name's Scott, and they got rid of him. All right, you got it? For speaking about peace, what's going on to the economy? Today, the markets took a hit. We've been warning about this for how long? So the markets are down over 360 points today. Financial stocks, including JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America, slid after Fitch warned it may be forced to downgrade a credit rating of dozens of banks. It comes as the latest challenges to the sector following Moody's decision last week to downgrade the rating of 10 banks while putting other institutions on the watch list. Isn't that nice, proper language? Isn't that nice how they speak? What, are you fucking kidding or what? We've been saying this for how long? The banking bust is coming with the commercial real estate bust. We've been warning about this for how long? The office building bust. And now, of course, in your Trends Journal, you have a great article by the great Gregory Mannarino, Commercial Real Estate Time Bomb. Yep. We've been saying this now for how long? We go to traderschoice.net, and he's telling you what we've been saying. This thing is totally out of control. Oh, but Jamie Dimon, the guy that's the head of JP Morgan Chase, that's been convicted of 5 felonies. Yeah, that JP Morgan Chase. Remember, go back to when the Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic, and they were all going down. He said, it's over. It's over. Again, all your facts are in the Trends Journal. Their quotes and ours. This thing's going down big. It's going down big. So subscribe to the Trends Journal. And I believe that, and we've been writing about that. When all else fails, they take you to war. The global economy is failing. And China is on the way out, man. I was saying, again, trend forecasters, you call things the way they are, not the way you want them to be or what you see, and then it changes, and you got to change your forecast. I had said the 21st century would be the Chinese century. That's before they launched the COVID war on Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the rat in 2020. And what I'm saying, no one is saying. They launched it to stop the protests that were going on in Hong Kong in 2019. And I used to be on Hong Kong TV. And they used to tell me, Mr. Salenti, we're not going to stop. The Chinese could not stop them. This is a city of 7.5 million people. Over 1 million people were taking to the streets in Hong Kong in protest. They couldn't stop them. But they launched the COVID war. Remember, they showed the pictures of people walking down the street. And they're building all of these quick facilities to take care of the people. Yep. They destroyed the Chinese with their COVID war, and all the arrogant clowns that followed have destroyed the lives and livelihoods of billions of people across the planet. And as I said, when all else fails, they take you to war. And the United States economy is in crash mode. What brought down the system back in 2008? The panic of 08, the domain name that I took out in 2007? Yeah, that one. The banking system collapsed. The Federal Reserve dumped in $29 trillion between 2007 and 2010 to pump up the banksters. That's right. This thing's going down big. It's going down hard. The commercial real estate sector, you're looking at some $20 trillion in debt that has to be paid. And these are floating loans. They got to renew their debt, and interest rates are way up. So they have to pay more as they have less tenants and less income coming in. You're going to see defaults, and you're going to see the banking system go down. I maintain my forecast that late September into October, that's when you're going to see the big decline. And also in the summer, anything could happen because you got very light trading now. It's summertime. And now we're going into the last 2 weeks of August. This is really vacation time. People don't have a clue of what's going on. You look at the mainstream media, all they're talking about is Trump, 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 Trump. Nothing else about the facts. All things are connected. As Chief Seattle said, all things are connected like the blood which unites us all. Ukraine war trend update. Yep, another 24 billion go into Ukraine. That brings us up to about 150 billion. Yeah, as Maui rots, right? No money for them. That's what Ron Paul was saying. I agree with him 100%. And the whole country is going down to shit. We're sending all this money overseas. But of course, I got to be careful saying what I'm saying because I might get blacklisted. And what else? Biden asked for $3.3 billion for U.S. riding infrastructure on the latest gamble over here. And then we have special guest articles by Dr. Joseph Mercola, featured articles by Nisha and John Whitehead, Indoctrination, Intimidation, Intolerance, What Passes for Education Today, and an article that's going to get a lot of people upset, and we're going to get blowback on it, but I agree with everything he's saying. Phil Giraldi, former top CIA guy. This is the Phil Giraldi that went into Bush's office, little Georgie Bush, with a pair of cojones small in a bath ball. Yeah, that guy. And said, Mr. President, here's the proof. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And Bush told him to leave the office. And Phil Giraldi, being the real man he is, quit the CIA. His article in there. You got to read this one. What's happening in Syria? Yeah, what's happening in Syria and what are we doing there? We're controlling about over 20% of the country and where all their oil is. Like I said, you think we would have invaded Libya and Iraq if their major export was broccoli? What the hell are we doing over there? We're invaded a foreign country. So again, subscribe to the Trends Journal.
You know, the aide to Zelensky had a retort for this because we would expect it and we could predict it. It's going to be tougher and he can't concede anything. And that is exactly what happened. But it still I got a little charge out of it because it's so silly. The aide said, I had this out on the internet. He said, that means, that is conceding territory, that means deliberately choosing the defeat of democracy. That's, boy, we can't be for this. If you're going to, oh no, we don't believe in all this democracy stuff. That the founders tried to teach us about pure democracy, at least.
But you're right to point out the reaction from Ukraine. And I would have to say, Dr. Paul, and I listened to Alex Christoforo this morning, who I like very much, because I think he's a very good commentator. But he pointed this out. It seems to me almost like Ukraine has been blindsided by the reaction, which you've already read one of them. But they're basically acting like nobody said this. Someone's making this up. And in fact, go to the next one. This is Alexei Danilov. He is, I would guess you would say, the equivalent of the National Security Council chairman. There is no compulsion to negotiate with Russia, Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council Secretary Danilov says. If you go to the next one, here's what he says when presented with this quote from the NATO high official, Chief of Staff to Jens Stoltenberg. Here's what Danilov's reaction was. Reports of this alleged pressure are not confirmed by anything. They exist only on the internet. I don't know, perhaps this is the work of the Russian troll army, but our partners have not set any demands to negotiate. Ukraine will solve this problem independently, and there can be no negotiation with Putin. Russia must be destroyed like a modern-day Carthage. You can't leave the enemy behind. So, to me at least, I don't know, maybe you feel different. That sounds like a guy who is broadsided with this and saying, no, that can't be true. It's impossible.
You know, another group that is confirming the fact that people are getting tired of this and there's no reason for the Ukrainians to celebrate is there's articles out now because, you know, they've lost so many people, 400,000. I don't believe those numbers are so huge. But they're still looking for more bodies. And so, it's a draft, of course. There are not many volunteers for this. But the draftees now, there are stories about them all hiding and trying to escape and hiding in the basement. So that's a confirmation that the patriotism and the desire to take on Russia, it has rather weakened.
And in a way you can understand why they're upset, because for the past year, the mantra has been nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. You know, like we won't even talk to anyone without them being there. And then all of a sudden they come into the room. They say, "Well, we made a couple decisions for you already. You're going to have to give that up in order for this to happen." So I think it's a real shift here in the paradigm.
And to me, it invited the thinking about wars in general.
Yeah.
And when wars are started illegally, unconstitutionally, and they start badly, they are destined to end badly. Then I got to thinking, well, can we figure out a couple of these? No, we thought for a few minutes we had more than a couple.
No kidding.
And of course, the two incidents that are most vivid into people's mind right now would be, of course, the leaving of Saigon.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that was in the 60s, and that was very vivid for me. It was a disaster. And then also Afghanistan. Now they're making hay. The Republicans are making hay out of that, and they rightly should criticize it. But you know, in some ways, the difference is, if you want to really look at a tragedy, it was what was going on in Vietnam. I mean, this was Afghanistan was tragic,
yeah.
But as far as Americans being killed and trying, the good people that were anti-Taliban trying to get out,
yeah.
You know, that's a different story. But this is this to me is a sign that if things aren't done cautiously, and everybody knows, why are we going to war? What is the goal? What's the end point?
Yeah.
How do we stop? It never happens, and so they continue. But you say, well, that's just sloppy planning. But like some people, and we're sometimes cynical enough to believe maybe it isn't an accident. Maybe some people deliberately like perpetual war.
Yeah.
I think we've been warned about perpetual war, and that's what goes on. And some people make a lot of money off this.
Yeah.
You know, not a couple billion,
Yeah.
but probably over the years trillions of dollars that go into the constant fighting of war. And we're getting more sophisticated. We exert our power through sanctions and robots and all this,
Yeah.
and we try to save the heartache of seeing Americans being killed and brought home. So, but the wars still go on and the suffering still lasts, because there's always a cost to our liberties and to our financial position with that. And that's why one of the reasons why I think Republicans are starting to be less hawkish, sending more money to Ukraine. But right now, I think the people in the driver's seat, the military-industrial complex, and the hawks that we have in Washington are in the driver's seat, and they're not going to quit budget. I mean, every week when things look like, where are they going to get the money? It's another many billions of dollars. Just recently, another time, $24 billion they do. So that myth will end.
Our next little segment is from AP, and of course, because it's AP, it means absolute propaganda. That's what it stands for. But nevertheless, they can't help but report a little bit of truth. If you put up that next clip, it's pretty fascinating that came through this morning. After every new indictment, Donald Trump has boasted that his standing among Republicans only improves. And he has a point. Nearly 2/3 of Republicans, 63%, now say they want former president to run again, according to a new poll from the AP Nork Center for Public Affairs Research. That's up slightly from 55% who said the same in April. I would say more than slightly. 55 to 63 is pretty significant. In April, when Trump began facing a series of criminal charges, 7 in 10 Republicans now have a favorable opinion of Trump, an uptick from the 60% who said so 2 months ago. They're viewing him more favorably after this.
I get the biggest charge out of those rhino Republicans who have deserted him and said, we have to stop anybody but Trump, and they fought it, and they were getting attention, and all of a sudden, right now, a few of them are quietly switching over.
Yeah, I think people are also seeing that, if this use of lawfare and the criminalization of speech is able to go through unchallenged, it's going to become the norm. You're going to have each president's going to put the previous one in jail. It's going to be worse than a banana republic. It's going to be a lunatic. And you mentioned how the rhinos and the other candidates, I think the one candidate who's gotten it right is Ramaswamy. Because he said, he's defended Trump. He said, look, I'm running against the guy, but I don't like what's happening. If I win, I'm going to pardon him. I don't stand for this. So I think he's playing it smart, and he's also going up in the polls. I've seen some polls where he's neck and neck with DeSantis.
No,
so it's a smart move.
Very interesting, and he comes across as he has beliefs. He tells you what they are. He sticks to them, and I think he comes across, and the people say, he's telling the truth.
Yeah,
we can trust what he's saying, and this is a big item. This is why the country starved for that.
Yeah.
To have somebody just come forward, and I think the opposition would be the current president. I mean, they can't be trusted. Can you imagine a real debate between Ramaswamy and Biden?
Whoa, no, that'd be one-sided, wouldn't it?
I don't think Biden will show.
I don't think he'll show.